All right, we're live. All right, so welcome back to Gamble Data and the Data Engineering channel. Tonight we have Shane Gibson of the Agile Data Guides, and I'm super excited to have him here tonight. We're going to have some great conversation. And Shane, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody out there?
Yeah, so Shane Gibson, based in a little place called Paikakaliki in Wellington, New Zealand. So forgive the accent for those who aren't from New Zealand. I suppose the way I kind of describe me is to describe my history, and I kind of break it down into 3 decades. So my first decade was working for large software vendors out of the US, but based here in New Zealand. So the Oracles, the SASs of the world. And I started off in financial systems, ERP, back then, and very quickly decided I hated that. But lucky enough, I was at Oracle at the time. We had some good data tools 30 years ago, Oracle Warehouse Builder, Oracle Discoverer. I'm that old. So I moved into the data domain and kind of spent 10 years working for those vendors, helping out. And then from there, second decade, I founded my own consulting company in the data space. So your typical 5 to 20 people, we went into large corporates, banks, insurance, government, and, effectively went from strategy down to implementation to building all the ETL to supporting them on an ongoing basis. And then the last decade's been kind of combination of two things: coaching data and analytics teams on how to change the way they work, which I love. And also co-founder of a startup, agiledata.io, where we're kind of building out a platform that helps myself and my co-founder deliver data to organizations that don't have a data team. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about that is I can now practice what I preach. So when I'm working with a data team and saying, hey, maybe you want to try this, then I can actually experiment with the two of us, Nigel and myself, to see actually does it work, right? And so I kind of, drinking the Kool-Aid while making it, so to speak.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I remember using Discoverer. Just you mentioned that, like that was, one of my early, kind of late early career tools that I used all the time. And then we moved to OBIEE, and I missed Discoverer when we moved to OBIEE. I was like, can we have
Yeah.
Discoverer back? I got used to that.
But the thing is, I'm going to talk a lot about patterns because that's just how I think and talk these days. But if we think about the last 3 decades, a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things haven't. There's now this whole wave of BI semantic layer conversations and the idea of context layers for AI tools.
Yeah.
Back in the Disco days, with Discoverer, we had an end user layer. We had business objects with their universe. We had a BI centric semantic layer to do a whole lot of heavy lifting. And so we go through these waves of have it, lose it, have it, lose it. And one of the things I want to talk about today is while our technology is constantly changing, we go back and forward, we tend to spend most of our time focusing on that and not focusing on the patterns that we use in the data craft, the way we work as a team, as a bunch of individuals. We just focus on the technology changes all the time and the latest cool. And for me, teams that have been really successful are the ones that focus on the way they work as much as they focus on the technologies they use.
And kind of going into like that concept of patterns and the way we work, you and I talked about the other day this concept of T skills and really what it means as a data engineer to kind of build out your own skill set and both broad in breadth as well as depth. And I think that was one of the things that you wanted to get into tonight as well.
Yeah, because I think it's important, if we talk about the last 3 decades, to say some things have changed. Back a while ago, we had, a couple of waves ago, we had lots of disparate tools. It wasn't called data engineering back there or analytics engineering. It was called an ETL developer or data warehouse developer. But those roles were quite specific. You got given a set of requirements and you built that piece, and you're working in a team typically where somebody did the bit before you and somebody did the bit after you. So BA will go and get requirements, data modeler would do the model design, somebody would do quite high quality specs, somebody else would maintain the tools, you would actually do the ETL piece. And then somebody else would do the viz, right? They come in with Disco or business objects of Cognos. And so you kind of sat in this box and you bled out a little bit to the other skills, but you were kind of safe in your box. And lots of people loved that, right? They were really good at what they did. They were experts. They were like master chefs. And then the market kind of changed. And we've seen that in other domains. So we've seen, full stack developers coming out of software engineering. We've seen data scientists be called unicorns, right? Where supposedly they're end to end. And in the latest wave, we went through the modern data stack again, where we started to specialize a little bit. But the latest wave, especially with the advent of AI, with the air quotes, we're going to see the need for that specialization to change. Yeah. Now it may. I'm not going to say it's going to disappear, but I'm going to say it's going to change. And so in the data engineering space, my belief to keep adding the value that data engineers provide is we need to broaden our skills. Now, it doesn't mean we need to be the masters of nothing, good at everything, masters of nothing. But what it means is we actually have to extend our skills out. And I use this idea of T skills, which came out of the Agile domain, I think, to kind of describe to engineers how I think they should change the way they work, but not what they do, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned an important point there, especially for data engineers. And I think that for data engineers, with the kind of introduction of AI, there's this concept of orchestration, right, that we've been doing for a long time. Probably before orchestration was introduced. And now we have AIs, these AI agents and AI swarms that will potentially help us do some of the data engineering work, but we're still gonna have to use that skill to kind of transfer to that, to orchestrate, I think, those AI agents and AI swarms, if I could speak tonight. And some of those skills are transferable. And yes, we're going to have to. I agree. We're going to have to kind of spread our wings a little bit. And I think that this is a pendulum that swings, just like it happens in business. And you kind of alluded to the pendulum swinging back and forth when we were talking about Discover and business objects and all those tools, and people getting very specialized in what they do. This happens in business all the time too. The pendulum swings to a more, a tighter rein of how things are, and then it swings back to this looser rein. And this happened in my career over 25 years, right? At first I was the data guy, so I did all the things, and then you become, like you talked about, you start to develop those steeper skills because you start to specialize in things like SSIS and ADF and all those different, Informatica, and maybe you pick one or two of those and get really deep in that. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and we've seen these waves, right? So these waves, every 7 to 9 years, we go through the wave of centralization and decentralization of tools. And so we were about to enter the wave where we move from decentralization in the modern data stack, 10 to 20 different bits of technology that were fit for purpose, best of breed, and we cobbled them together. And we were moving back to the centralization. There's a couple of things that causing that. A lot of the startups that got funding back when money was free, money became tight, so they were naturally running out of runway and were going to be acqui-hired or go under. The big boys, the Databricks and the Snowflakes, wanted to become ecosystems, end-to-end platforms, which is what naturally happens. Think Oracle, IBM, Microsoft back in the old days. Yeah. So they naturally start bringing in and buying those capabilities or building themselves to go end-to-end. So we get this natural centralization, decentralization behavior in our data domain every 7 to 10 years. But this time's slightly different, because with the Gen AI and the LLMs, we're seeing this disruption and the time it takes for those waves to happen. And as data engineers, it's my belief we have a choice. We can get even more deep into the skill we have, because what we're going to see is 80 to 95% of the engineering work is going to be treated as commodity. And 5% of it will be organizations or the work that requires craft, that requires expert coaching level. People in the middle going to have a bit of a challenge, is my view. And so we have a choice. We either become those expert coaches in our core skill, or we go for a breadth of skills. And that's where the idea of T skills comes from. So if we think about a diagram, and across the top, we have a set of skills. And in my view, in the data domain, we have skills around stakeholder engagement, facilitation, requirements gathering, architecture, data modeling, development, testing or QA, documentation, and releasing, management of the release in the platform. So think about those across the top, and then down We have the depth, so we have this idea of a novice. I've never really done it before. I want to learn it. Practitioner, I use it every day. Adept, I use it every day. And if I have a problem that's slightly different, I can probably work it out myself. Expert, I'm the one in the room on the Zoom that everybody comes to when they have that problem. And then we have this thing called a jump to a coach. And the reason that's different is to go from an expert to a coach, you need to be able to teach somebody else to do it like you do. So rather than do the work, you have to explain and mentor the work. And that's actually quite a hard jump. So skills across the top, depth down the side, and then we figure out what we're good at. So if we're really good at development, if you think about it, development's in the middle of the skills, we get this idea of a T because that's our strength. And then we have these other skills that we often see. So often developers or engineers are good at testing. They're good at QA. They're good at modeling. Yeah, they're kind of good at documentation if they have to be, pretty much good at release. But if I look at somebody that's really good at facilitation, like a role that used to be called business analysis or a data analyst, they tend to be on the left, right? They tend to be more of, a portion of an F because they're good at stakeholder management. They're good at facilitation. They're good at eliciting requirements and demands and needs. They might be good at documentation. Funnily enough, they always tend to like to do those two. So we get these shapes of skills. And right now, my view is people need to choose what they want to do next because change is an opportunity. It's a risk, but it's also an opportunity. So what do you want to do? Do you want to increase the depth of your skills or do you want to increase the breadth of your skills? That's the choice you have to make today, I believe.
Yeah. And there's so many different things out there, to your point of there's Snowflake, there's Databricks, there's, Fabric. Which is another conversation that we could get into. But there's such especially I think in data engineering, there's so many different tools out there. And I'm a believer that once you become versatile enough and adapt enough at a couple of those tools, you can fumble your way through a job with one of the other tools that maybe you haven't had experience in yet. You could, if you're used to seeing SSIS and ADF and like AWS Glue, then if you're introduced to Informatica, God forbid, then you could fumble your way through it, right? You could figure it out as you get into it.
And the reason is because you've learned a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you've learned a common solution to a common problem. And therefore that skill of that pattern is sitting in your head, right? And then when you move to technology, all you're doing is remapping your language. Yeah, you're going from, hey, I know how to do change detection between two Delta files, right? So I'm going to get a snapshot of data today. I'm going to get a snapshot of data tomorrow. They're going to come in for whatever reason. I need to understand the change records because I need to detect those and only pass those change records to the next layer. And maybe, maybe I'm doing that, old school in SSIS, or maybe I'm doing that, DBT. I now have that pattern of how to take two snapshot pieces of data, compare them and pull out the differences and then load that somewhere else. That is a pattern, that is a skill. And now I can change my language. I can move to, I don't know, what's the DBT replacement now? SDF, no, SQL mesh, one of those, right? Or whatever's going to turn up, with the changes happening in the market. What I'm doing is just learning a different interface or a different language. Most of the data engineers I know now are good at Python and SQL. 30 years ago, it might have been PLSQL and SQL, but we have these different languages and all we're doing is applying the same patterns to those languages. So that for me is what we need to keep on doing in the data domain.
Yeah. And I think, for me, one of the things that I share with my mentees is once you learn one language or one pattern, right? I think essentially here, once you learn one language, it's easier to learn the next one. And I recommend people start with SQL because in my opinion, it's the easier of the different types of languages that you can learn, and you can still learn with like T-SQL or the PL SQL, you could learn loops and things like that. And I think once you learn a loop and start to master loops and those types of concepts, then that is such a transferable skill to other programming languages, it's easier to pick up Python or Java, or it's hard to pick up Java for any of you out there that are really love Java. Better, kudos to you. But
Although I've heard learning Scala is worse, right?
yeah. That can be too, for sure.
But this is the thing, if I think about my life, what I wish I had done at a very early age is I wish I had learnt another language. Yeah. So that actually at 4 or 5, I had learned another speaking language and another reading language, because I think that actually would have helped wire my brain slightly differently and got better at pattern recognition and changing the language I use for those patterns much earlier. Because it's this interesting thing. I have this theory that when you start hitting your 50s, you actually get better at pattern recognition, because our ancestors in the early ages, we could run fast. Yeah. And the second part of our life, we had a community that protected us. And then we kind of got old and not so valuable. So our brains got wired to understand the risk much faster than everybody else. So we could run earlier or hide quicker. And so I fundamentally believe that our brains are wired that people of my age, it's weird. You talk to them and they start talking in pattern language without knowing they're doing it. So I think this has to become a conscious skill rather than an unconscious skill these days. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. So you're talking about patterns and skills and things that you have to have. One of the big skills, I think, especially as we move forward into this age of AI, and I think it's important for data engineers, is communication, right? And how we communicate with stakeholders to really make sure that we're getting to kind of the root of the what's going on, of why we're doing a project. Though for those of you out there that have been doing this, that are data engineers or data analysts, you've experienced this probably, and I know that Shane's experienced this as well. You talk to a stakeholder and they tell you, okay, this is what I want. Sometimes stakeholders don't exactly know what they're asking for, and they're not, going back to, speaking different languages, they're not always speaking the same language that you are. So, it's important to kind of ask questions and develop those communication skills.
Yeah. And if we think about stakeholders in the organization, they're speaking the language they think we want to hear. So if you go and listen to a data person go to a stakeholder and say, what do you want? You will typically hear back a bunch of requirements for a dashboard or a report. And that's for 2 reasons. That's because that is what we give them back 9 times out of 10, right? So we give them the language of a dashboard or a report as the way they consume the data or information that they've asked for. And we often talk that way as well. And so we're training our stakeholders to use this language as reports and dashboards.
Yeah.
If you talk to an engineer, and I'm back in the days where data engineering did all the work, right, before we had this analytics engineer split, we would think in source systems, because we knew the hardest part of our job technically was one of 2 things: getting the bloody data from where it lives into a place we could actually use it, and then munging the shit out of it so it was fit for purpose to do the job that we needed to do, because whoever wrote that system didn't care about using the data after it turned up on their pretty screen.
Right.
So we focus on that, right? Our conversations around where's that data live? What's the structure? What system? What does it look like? What horrible things do you want me to do to it, right? And so we use this language of our source systems and this language of our transformation. And we have this disconnect because stakeholders are talking in a language that's not their native. They don't talk dashboards and reports. We're forcing them to go from English to French. And then the rest of us are speaking Spanish, right? And now we're going, oh, okay, hold on. I'm Spanish to French to English. And what happens? We get miscommunication. So what we want to do is we want to change the way we have our language. And there's a couple of things we can do. The first thing is, if we think about languages being shared, the shared language in any organization is a problem statement and what we call the core business processes. So if I say to you, customer orders product from store, you can tell me which industry-ish it is and which industry it isn't, right? Like, you're not going to say it's a hospital.
Right.
You're not going to say, you're not going to say it's an insurance company. It might be, but probably not, right? So that business process language is a shared language that most of us understand. And then the second thing is we want to understand the problem statement from our stakeholder, because we're the experts that can help them understand how to use information to fix it. So we want to move from what data do you want to what actions and outcomes do you want to achieve. And so once we do that, we have this really weird thing that happens. We get seen as adding value to the organization because we're no longer a Jira request factory where they submit a form and 6 months later the wrong data turns up, which actually is one of the problems that we have. That's not our fault, but we can fix, because when we give them, somebody says, I need this data, and it goes in the queue, and 6 months later they get it and they say, thanks, and they never use it. It's probably because the problem they're trying to fix, the action and the outcome they're trying to do has already happened. They've gone and fixed it in the last 6 months without us. And now this data turns up and it's no longer a burning problem for them. So that delay is another real issue that we have that we need to fix in understanding their problem statements and their language much quicker than we do now.
Yeah. And I think that's a catch-20, a little bit of a catch-22, because it's, like to your point, I think a lot of data teams fall into that pattern of they become a request factory of they're just cranking out data all day long without really understanding, how that's moving the needle for the business, right? And since a data team, I've seen data teams have hundreds of tickets in their queue and have a data team of like 2 or 3 people trying to crank through it, and it becomes, like you said, it's 6 months. And then by then that marketing team has figured out how to use MS Access, and they've developed their own, little dashboard and report that they're using. And they're like, okay, cool. It doesn't matter anymore.
And nowadays it's, Google Sheets. I was talking to somebody the other day and they have built an amazingly interesting system that is, an operational system that's driven by 176 disconnected but integrated Google Sheets.
Yeah.
We're going to see that with with the LLMs and the Gen AI and the new ways that people can build systems quicker.
Yeah.
We struggled when we had 5 big, SAP, big old ERPs, right? We struggled to get that into the data platforms. Then we went to the software as a service cloud world, right? And now we're, what is it? And I read somewhere that an organization that's between 0 and 50 employees will have somewhere between 7 and 100 systems where they type data into. And, if we count email and all those kind of things. You get to large organizations, it's 1,000.
Yeah.
Now you think about what happens when these vibe coders can go and make an application that does one thing really well and really quickly. As data people, we're going to have 10,000 systems potentially that we need to collect data from if we work the way we currently work. So we got a kind of interesting problem coming. And so we've got to change the way we work, right? We've got to change the way we engage. And luckily, we can do a thing where we look at the other domains in our world and we find patterns that work for them. And like the example I use is DevOps to data ops. I remember the days where we didn't use source control. Didn't exist. I remember the days where we used, what the hell was, God, I'm sounding old. What was the old source control systems where they were completely disconnected? It was all a desktop tool.
Before Git, that stuff that
well before Git.
Well before Git. Oh my gosh, it had like a split window. And
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was called. It's
anyway.
I could see it in my head. I can't remember.
Yeah, but the ETL tools we were using didn't integrate with it. So you had to kind of like download the code and upload the code, and that was a nightmare. And so we've adopted these really good patterns from the DevOps community, from the DevOps domain, that help us manage our source control, treat our services as cattle, not pets, terraform our platform so we can deploy them really quickly. All these really good patterns. And as data professionals, we can go and grab a whole lot of patterns from the product domain. Yeah. Because if you think about the way product people work, they don't ask for requests. They have a role of a product manager or a product leader who actually goes and talks to a whole lot of stakeholders and wants to understand the problem they have and how they can solve it. And so one of the things I've been focusing on is how do we take those patterns and tweak them, because we can never use them exactly as they are, because what things we do are slightly different. But how can we tweak those patterns and those pattern templates and make them useful in the data domain? And I think that's where we need to move to next as well, right? Treating what we do as a product that solves a problem, that meets a need, that covers a want, not a data request.
Yeah, not just the data. And I think that so one of the things that you do is coaching for other companies, right? That's it's not one of the things that you provide. So when you come into a company where they have fallen into, and this is kind of off topic from but I think it'd be an interesting conversation, when they've fallen into this system of kind of this request factory, do you have a specific pattern that you use to help them get out of that situation?
So I have a toolkit or a library, and that's because I've learned that every context is different and patterns work in a certain context and they actually become anti-patterns in another context. They make things worse. And it took me a while to learn that in my coaching journey. So I would work with a data analytics team. And the key thing is, although I'm hired by somebody in the organization, I work for that team. Right. My role as a coach is to stand behind them and help them improve the way they work. And then I get the hell out of Dodge, right? I'm there for a good time, not a long time. So the team should be able to learn these skills of how to change the way they work and increment and iterate it and just get better at what they do every day without me. Right. So the first thing I did was I'd go work with a team, and then I'd jump to another team in another organization. And my head was naturally at the maturity level in the processes of the previous team, right? Mm-hmm. And that was wrong, because the context of the new team was completely different organization, different industry, different tool sets, different way of working, different problems. So I had to learn to kind of unlearn really quickly. I had to go into detox, right? And kind of wipe my thing. And then the second mistake I made was I would bring my pattern template, like not my toolkit. I'd bring my DAG, my directed graph. And I'd go, well, this worked last time, so we're going to start here and we're going to do this next and fix this. The problem was the context of those teams wasn't the same. So while they may have been valuable things to fix, they weren't the most valuable. So what I learned is, actually, when I first engage, I sit back and listen. I watch and listen. I just see where their problems are. I ask them, because what I've learned over the last decade is those data analytics teams know where the problems are. They are often just not allowed to fix them. Like technical debt is one that breaks my balls every time, right? Because you say to the team, why do we keep having failures on a Friday night? And they're like, yeah, because this part of the system's broken. Okay, and how do we fix that? Well, we've been told not to release on a Friday night. Okay, but are we going to go fix that part of the system? No, we're not allowed to. This other stuff's more important, and we're not given the Jira points. And that's not fair to them, right? They're data professionals and they know. So part of the coaching is to get the rest of the organization, the leaders, to understand that you're hiring a bunch of professionals who know how to do their job. Let them do their freaking job. And there's a bunch of patterns we can use for that, because I've learned that just saying that to the leaders doesn't work. So we have some choices. We can do what we call point tax if we're using Scrum. We say to the team, 20% of all the points, all the effort, every iteration is going to be given to you to do whatever the hell you want to make the system better, and nobody's going to challenge that. Now, we come back to the culture of the organization. If the culture of the organization is truly open, we will disclose the fact that that's happening. If the culture of the organization is toxic and hierarchical and based on a bunch of 10 layers of managers who lie to each other, we will pretty much hide that fact, because we want the team to have the ability to spend that time to fix things. Yeah. Now, if we see an anti-pattern where the team spend that time going watching cat videos, which very rarely happens, but has happened, not cat videos, but you know what I mean, then we'll have a conversation with the team about, actually, hold on, you actually need to fix the system, because we're telling everybody that the system's getting better based on doing this pattern, and you kind of need to keep the promise. And so that's the thing, right? Is that I have this library and this pattern recognition now. One of the first ones that I do, though, and I will do it repeatedly with every team, is what I call node and links. So there's a really good TEDx presentation called How to Make Toast. So if anybody wants to, it's really entertaining. It's about 15 minutes. Just Google How to Make Toast TEDx and go and watch it. And it talks about nodes and links, but what he's actually teaching you is systems thinking. If we think about a directed graph, if we think about an ETL flow, right, grab this piece of data, do this horrible thing to it, CT table here, do this horrible thing to it. We daisy chain these steps. Think about the way you work as that. Like, what's the first thing that happens? How does a stakeholder engage with the need to get data? What do? Do they submit a request? Do they ask Bob or Jane? How do they do that? And then follow that all the way through until you've delivered that final product and you maintain it. And every step is a node and every line is a link. And then what you want to do is you want to look at it from two lenses. Which of those nodes or links is broken? Which ones are the ones that cause you the most pain in the way you work? And then what can you do to fix it? Or which ones would make you faster, right? Less effort. So maybe that one's the most broken, but if I automate the snot out of this one, it will give me more time to spend fixing that one.
Yeah.
Once you've done that for your way of working, do that for your system. I treat it as an information factory. Think of it as a manufacturing plant. Where is the machines and where are they broken, right? Because we should be automating those via code. And then the last lens is focus on the handoffs. When something moves from a node to another node, that link, what is the thing that gets handed off and what is the value? Like, does it work or is it waste? So if we see that we spend far too much time on documentation and we're not actually using that documentation, then that's waste. We get from a lean domain, right? We can see waste management. But no documentation, complete ad hoc mess is just as much waste as too much documentation.
Yep.
So that's what we should be doing, is saying, hey, we spend this time doing this thing. Who uses it? What do they use for it? How can we automate it? How can we reduce the amount of effort it takes? Is there still value in doing it? And that, for me, is just systems thinking, and data people are systems thinkers. So it's kind of intriguing when they see that. The lights just go on and they go, oh, so you're saying actually treat everything I do just the way I treat the code I do it with. Yeah, because it's the way you naturally think, right? It's the way your brain is wired. That's why you're a data engineer.
That's awesome. And we've got a question from our friend here, Ramona. Is that a reward system that you instituted? They do this similar thing with agents. Kind of going
so
back.
They say. Yeah, so they say. Yeah, I believe that. So let's put it on the table. I believe that the Gen AI LLMs that we've seen already are the same as the cloud change, the iPhone change, wireless video players, remote controls back in my day. It is a fundamental change of our world. The number of times I use ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, all those tools now every day has fundamentally changed the way I work.
Yeah.
We still have a lot of snake oil salespeople, vendor architectures, going out there with the AI agents and agentic stuff. And, we will know in 6 to 12 months what's real and what's not. So yes, potentially we could map our nodes and links for every human in the team and then automate it with an agent. If that happens, ignore everything I've said and go be a plumber or a dentist, because that's the only jobs that'll be left for us. I don't believe it will happen to that degree, but hey, if you had to ask me that, GPT-3 was going to turn up 3 or 4 years ago, whenever it was, and it's going to work the way it was, I wouldn't have believed you. So,
right.
Yeah.
I think how much it's all grown in especially the last 12 months. I mean, has really kind of pushed that bar. And then, Apple tried to come out this past week and say it's all just hoopla, right? Apple came out and said, stood on stage and said, AI doesn't really reason. And it was some mind blowing thing. And
yeah, but AI does. So, the reasoning models do daisy chain a set of tasks together in a way that works. Yeah. That is you go and talk to a junior data engineer and ask them to tell you all the steps from SAP through to Power BI on their first week. They're not going to know those steps. They're also not going to know that all those SAP tables are in German. Yeah, that there's 30,000 of them and you only need 3, that you're going to have to go and ask, Janet down the road, because actually finding an SAP data dictionary is pretty difficult. They're not going to know that, but actually the LLMs kind of do. The reasoning models, maybe we should give a different term, right? Not reasoning model, but daisy chaining model. I don't know, whatever you want to call it.
Complex if statement.
If then else, yeah.
Yeah, it's the most complex if statement of the 21st century.
But we've never seen those in code, right? We've never seen a 300 line case statement. Never seen one of those in the data domain ever. Never written one. Not me.
Yeah.
Never written one.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
But there's a question, right? How many people have actually used a Google Sheet or an Excel spreadsheet to create the case statement pairs and then written a piece of code that looped through it, so that when they added another case statement, they didn't have to edit the code. They just had to add another row.
Right.
Yep. Not me. Honest stuff.
Or just dump it all in a table so that it just loops through. I mean, yeah. Too funny. Well, awesome. But yeah, and so trying to rein us back to the conversation about communicating, that we have ventured way off the kind of path for, not too far off, but going back to that, and it's so important, I think, talking to your stakeholders. And I think, to your point of, stakeholders talk to us like they think that we want to hear them, that conversation of, I need this to show up on a dashboard, even to the point where I've had stakeholders come to me and say, hey, I built this really cool Excel sheet. This is how I want my Power BI report to look like. Can you get the data out and make it look like this?
It's going to get worse, because now I'm listening to people saying they've used Lovable to create a dashboard.
Yeah.
And they're actually publishing it. Can you just plumb the data into it?
Yeah.
Because now they've got, people have the tools. We've democratized that work now. People have the tools to actually build a beautiful thing by using natural language and 10 minutes. So those requests are going to get even more than they were before.
Well, and I think, to your point about Lovable, I think that people will, for lack of a better term, bastardize the data out there to get it to a place where Lovable can get to it, right? I've seen people go out and take business objects reports, schedule a business object report to email to a SharePoint. The SharePoint extracts the Excel file from the email, dumps it into a OneDrive or that SharePoint location, and then just wire Lovable directly to that Excel file that gets dumped into that OneDrive. That'll be what people will do. I mean, people find a way, business units find a way, especially when you have a data team that potentially takes, 5 to 8 months to get to and complete their project.
Yeah. And the one that I got told the other day is chief executives now that take the data out of this, like extract those Excel spreadsheets or get them sent, put it into N8N and then use it. So now we have this completely disparate system that's holding corporate data with no governance, no security, no PII, but it's the chief executive doing it because they can. And actually they're so sick of the delay it takes, not just the data people, but everybody in the organization. So the world is changing. And again, I'll come back to, we need to decide what part of that world we want to be in. And one of the questions that came up really early was from Jay. And the question is, internet is full of tutorials and boot camps on learning tools. We need more of these videos, like what happens in data apart from tools. And that made me really think, because I can go and see 100 online videos now and learning tools for SQL and Python and all that good stuff. Not so much for slowly changing dimensions and dimensional modeling. It's really intriguing, and definitely not for data vault. I'm a big data vault bigot, but you got to pay a fortune to try and learn that thing for some reason. But when we talk about soft skills, actually, there's not a lot out there. Now, why is that? Because with tools and SQL languages, we have a structure or set of patterns that are known. And therefore, remember I talked about going from expert to coach, teaching somebody to do what you do. When it is a structured language like SQL and there are a bunch of rules, it's easier to teach. When there's a tool, I can show you that tool, and the tool has a bunch of rules, and I can teach you those rules. With soft skills, it's a little bit harder. And so, as well as patterns, I talk about pattern templates. Pattern templates are artifacts, templates that you fill out that achieve a task. And the reason I focus on them, because remember, I went back to that idea of nodes and links of a team. And I said the handoffs is where I see a lot of the problems. When the BA does the requirements document and it used to hand over to the data modeler, 9 times out of 10, the data modeler will ignore the document, go talk to stakeholders, and then build the data model. Yeah, data modeler will then 6 months later hand over to the ETL team, who would then pretty much ignore the documentation, look at the source data, and right. And so those handoffs, those artifacts were expensive, and were not used as didn't deliver the value that they should have.
Yep.
So if we think about templates and artifacts being things we fill out, then if we can find ways of having artifacts that teach people these soft skills, then I have found it so much easier to do that, which is why, the first book I wrote was around data requirements gathering, because that was one of the biggest problems I saw for data professionals. And so I picked up the business model canvas, which has been around for years, and I iterated it, right? So pick up a good template and then make it fit for purpose for data people. And now I can teach that. I can coach that. I can spend an hour and show somebody the canvas, and whether they're a data engineer or a data analyst or a data scientist or an AI prompt engineer, they kind of get it, because there's now a structure and a set of rules. And I thought about it that way. So good question, Jay, because it made me actually change completely how I think, my mental model, to go, actually, we need more of those, because by having those, then we can make more videos. We can make more ways for people to understand these skills. Because, I'm mentoring a master's in data science student in New Zealand at the moment. And, when I listen to the curriculum of the school, of the university, it's out of date. It's not teaching them soft skills. It's teaching them technologies that I don't even think we use them anymore. Not this particular one, but I was talking to some students a while ago that are still getting taught Hadoop. Not the patterns of Hadoop, not the patterns of distributed systems and centralized data and the unstructured data and schema on read. None of those. They're taught actual Hadoop. And I'm like, what the actual? Anyway, we need to do more educating of people of these soft skills, and then people have a choice of whether they want to increase their T skills breadth over depth or not. It is their choice.
And I think that's a conscious decision that you have to make, right? I think that it's easy to fall into, we've talked about this the other day, but it's easy to fall into that shiny object syndrome, right? Where, oh, that's pretty, I want to learn that. And, oh, that's pretty, I want to learn that. And then all of a sudden you have this huge breadth of knowledge, but you don't get below surface layer of any of it. And then that, especially in the age of AI, I think that's where you run the risk of losing your career, because you didn't develop that breadth or you didn't develop that depth of that T model to really demonstrate that you have anything further than what AI could do on its own, right?
And so let's talk about that for a second, right? Because we're inferring that AI will take the data engineering job, and I'm not sure that's true. I think, like I said, that there will become a lot of the work will become done by the AI, and the people that survive will become craftspeople that do the stuff that's really hard. But also there's this idea of 10xing. So if you adopt those AI tools and patterns, you can actually take away that drossy work and just focus on the stuff that's hard that it can't do. Yeah. And so by experimenting with these tools yourself to see what they're capable of and where they can help you do a better job and make your job more fun, that may be where you go, right? You may actually increase your depth of engineering skills using AI tool patterns. And that's okay, right? That is a good thing to do. You just have to make a choice, I think, right now. I think if you sit there and say, the way I've worked for the last 10 years is going to stay the same. I remember my data warehouse developer friends when Analytics Engineers came out. The world's not the same anymore, right? It never is.
And I think if you have worked in this industry for 10 years, you've probably, especially the last 10 years, you've been forced to change, right? I mean, there are some people out there, I've run into a couple where they refuse to learn cloud technologies, and those people stick with these on-prem SQL Server shops, and they refuse to learn anymore. But the reality is that as a data engineer, you have to learn more. You have to, if you want to stay relevant, you're going to have to continue to learn. You're going to have to love learning. And I think that you have to learn to use AI to get from 0 to 1 so that you could get to the fun stuff, because that challenging stuff is the fun stuff. That's the stuff that makes you excited to do that makes me excited to do. I'm not going to speak for the whole, industry, but it makes me excited to do what I do, right? Is the challenging stuff, those edge cases. Because AI can't see all those edge cases. That's where we're still going to have to be that human in the loop of these things happen. AI doesn't see it because maybe it's not in the data set that it's been, given, but we know that they happen, right? We see that they happen. We can predict based on our own personal experiences that these things are going to occur, and then we can account for them. But and more challenging things.
And it's a choice, right? So I have some friends in their late 60s that are still COBOL developers on mainframes and still making an absolute fortune because there is very few of them.
I have a friend
that takes that one, right?
Yeah.
But that's a really small niche. I don't know that many COBOL developers still doing COBOL development on a mainframe and getting paid really well. So if that's what you want to do, then that's okay, right? Just know that's your niche and don't worry about, breadth of skills or depth of skills right now. But for the rest of us, I think we need to understand that changes, and it's just choices. We have some new things to learn, and most data engineers I know love learning, right? They love solving problems. They love learning new things. So just pick. And all I'm saying is, while you naturally want to go into tools and depth of your skill, have a think about breadth. See if there's some other parts of the job that you enjoy, that if you did more of it, you'd still enjoy your work and you'd be more valuable to organizations than a person that is just a really, really strong data engineering team.
Yeah. And I would say for, those of you out there that are looking to get into data, if you don't love learning, then this is not the career path for you. I mean, the learning, again, I know that Shane's been doing this for a long time. Just like I've been doing it a long time. Ramona's out there. I know she's been doing it for a while. For those of us that have been in it as long as we have, like, we've seen so much change over 25, 30 years, like, from DTS packages to where we're at now with the, all the ETL tools that are out there, and Airflow, and I mean, there was a day that I had to schedule my tasks with like a Windows scheduler, right?
Yeah.
Analytics
or Control M on the mainframe. This is the thing, right? Think about this. I've been doing this for just over 35 years, and I think you're probably 25, right?
Right. Yeah.
And everything has changed, right? Every tool we've used, every technique and pattern we've used is iterated, but we're still doing it. I still love it. It is such a cool place to be, where this change is just so invigorating. And then the other thing that people often patterns survive. So I was really intrigued when analytics engineering took off and dimensional modeling came back as the core modeling model. Because if we go back and look in history, the reason we actually did dimensional modeling was a constraints-based problem. Our hardware that we had couldn't handle all the data. So we had to do subsets. Yep. This is back in the day where if we needed some more compute power, we had to ask for budget, get it, order a server, wait for somebody to make it, wait for them to ship it, wait for them to get it into a data center, rack and stacked, configured, and then we can move some data onto it, right? That was like, 12 weeks if we were lucky. Yeah. Now we put our credit card into Google Cloud and we get it in a minute. So because we didn't have the firepower or most organizations didn't have the firepower to query all the data in one go, the dimensional model was come up with, which cut it down, right? We had star schemas, we had smaller fact tables and dimensions we could choose which one we wanted to use. that whole modeling paradigm came out of that constraints model.
Yeah.
And then analytical engineering came in, and people found that actually, hey, 5,000 DBT models, air quotes again, because it's just a bunch of code.
Right.
Well, we've seen that before, right? We saw when we had Tableau, and we ended up with 5,000 Tableau dashboards, right? We've seen what happens when democratization happens, and it has some good and some bad. So we weren't surprised where we ended up with thousands of DBT models that became highly inefficient.
Right.
But the fact then that dimensional modeling came in as the kind of core modeling pattern, that intrigues me. Like, Ralph Kimball hasn't taught it, and Mark haven't taught it for years. Yes, the books are around. What made that pattern actually become the core pattern for DBT modeling? That intrigues me, right? But yeah, change is good, right? If it wasn't changing, it'd be so boring.
It would be incredibly boring. I like Ramona's comment here about, she would start queries and then go to lunch. I remember those days. I remember one of my first jobs, I had to call the network guy and be like, hey, can you change the tape? I need the data from 6 months ago. And there were these huge rolls of tape that they literally had to pull off and replace so that I could pull data from 3-4 years ago. But yeah, there was that definitely ages me, I think. But I like that you're at least nodding, and so I feel validated. But
my father used to work on mainframes when I was a kid, and so I don't think they're quite punch cards for them. But were they? No, I don't think they were. But yeah, they were definitely tapes. Yeah.
But yeah, and to Ramona's point here, starting queries and then go to lunch. Oh yeah, I mean, hit a button, before you left for the day and hope and pray that, your query was done by the morning when you got back and it didn't fail 5 minutes after you walked out the door. There were definitely those times. And like I said, Windows Scheduler. We have a few questions here. So, hey, as a complete fresher, can I become a AI engineer? Can I become an AI engineer? Okay. I think probably not jump right into AI engineering. What's your take on that, Shang?
I break it down to patterns. Like, what the hell do you mean by semantics, or context? What's an AI engineer? So if you wanted to learn how to do prompt engineering, how to use the language of prompts to write good prompts to get the LLMs to do a task well, go learn that. I think that may or may not have value. Just be aware that lots of people are now using the LLMs to write prompts for the LLM. I do that. I'll go in and give it some context. I will get I will say, I need to write a prompt for you to behave like this. And I will get ChatGPT to give me back that prompt. I will then go over to Gemini and I will say, here's a prompt for an LLM to behave like this, improve it. And I will then loop it through the LLMs until I get a prompt that is better than me. So I think that's going to get commoditized a little bit. If you think about, are you talking about the systems that we will use? The idea that we've got an LLM, we're going to do some RAG reinforcement, some vector databases to hold the context, all these moving parts, MCP. Get into that. But again, I think we're going to see that get commoditized quite quickly. So unless you can get into the companies that are building those things, I think they're going to get snowflaked. So get into it, but just try and figure out where that niche is, where you're good, you enjoy it, and it's going to be a career that is worth investing in for the next 5 years. So good time to get into it.
Yeah, a great time to get into it. And I think, to your point, Ramona's point, context right here that we need to, because I think when I saw the AI engineer, and I immediately went into somebody that is actually behind the scenes writing the code for the AI, right? But you all went a different, kind of the prompt engineering, route.
Oh, because what else is it? It's if you're building a tool like Lovable or Cursor, you're really a software engineer using an LLM. With a bunch of prompts and reinforcement models. Or are you talking about you want to go into OpenAI and become part of the team that actually train the LLMs and figure out the next generation of that? I mean, we know the FANG companies, right? We know that Apple, Google, those big tech-centric companies, if you can get in there as a graduate, you get to learn a bunch of skills that not many of us ever got to learn. because of the scale of what they do. So if you can do that, yeah, good luck to you. I think it's a pretty good job to have.
I like this question, and this one comes up a lot when I'm on this, when I'm doing this. How do I switch from a software engineer to a data engineer? And honestly, like, I don't think that people think of that path. But I've run into a handful of software engineers over the years that have been like, I really love data, and how do I get on your side of the wall? Like, literally,
Oh.
usually, like, literally on the other side of the wall from me, and they'll be like, "Hey, Chris, how do I become a data engineer? I like software engineering. I know Python. What else do I need to learn?" So yeah, I think I'd love to hear your take on this one.
Okay, here's a spicy one. Don't. Yeah. So software engineer, data engineer is a role. I've been talking about skills. So as a software engineer, use the data engineering, learn the data engineering skills and do it in your day job. Because if we think about this whole idea of contracts, data contracts and the push left, if we think about the original writing of data mesh, what we said, or what those things say, is data teams get given data as an exhaust. The applications, the systems of capture data in a certain way to make the operational system work, but they never make it in a way that we can use. So we have this whole domain of roles that do nothing but take the shitty exhaust data and try and make it smell fresh.
Yeah.
But the whole movement is to push it left. Yeah. And I'm actually going to say there's going to be a whole movement of pushing it right, but we won't talk about that because we don't have time. So if you think about what skills do data engineers have that you can actually apply in the software and engineering domain to remove the need for that work to happen, to have it happen somewhere else, that is what I'd be doing right now. Now, the problem is most organizations don't do that. They have a software engineering team and a data engineering team. So you've got some cultural barriers. And so here's a really simple example. If you go and do a whole lot of research, use Perplexity, and figure out the idea of historization, the idea of keeping a historical copy of data, and then you think about it in core business process, customer orders product. So in your source system, your software that you're writing, if you're writing that system, you are probably going to store every order that happened because it has value to you, because the user is pretty much going to go back in and say, what were my orders last week? So you're going to store those historical events. But if marketing changed the price of that product, you're probably not going to store that change easily, because the customer ordered the product had a price. I know what time that order was, therefore I know what the price was at the time of the order.
And that transaction is probably stored that way.
That's right, because we have to have all those orders stored in our software system because we want to display them on the screen to the user.
Yeah.
But as data people, somebody's going to ask us, what date did we change the price of that product from $1 to $2? And you probably don't hold that. And so we have to detect it and store it forever. That one pattern, if you created a historical view of all your data in your software engineering system, you're going to save a whole lot of work. And specifically now with the advent of AI, with the idea of MCPs and the idea of meshing and gridding, where we're going to push the workload more and more back to the source system, if you can hold that pattern, if you hold that historical data, then the agents will use it. They don't have to go off to the data warehouse. Yeah. So just look at the data patterns and the skills you need and apply them in your day job. And I think that's what I'd do.
Yeah. +1 to Shane. Yeah, Ramona's +1 and Shane, your answer, and learn business talk. I think that I think that that's a lot of what we're talking about here too, is learn the way that the business speaks. That some of the best data engineers and just best data analysts too, and scientists, are the ones that spent time in the domain first before they moved into those roles, because they understand kind of that front end and that how the business talks. They can.
So again, can I be spicy on this?
Yeah. By all means.
First thing is, if you want to, in the new world, never use the word the business. Because what are you saying, right? You're saying, I work for an organization and that's them, and then there's me.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you work for the same organization? Aren't you trying to get the same outcomes and actions? If that organization has to make money to pay your wage, aren't you there to help them make money? If that organization is doing good in the world, aren't you there to help them good? don't talk about the business. Talk about, you can talk, I use the word stakeholders now because there are stakeholders I work for or with to achieve something, and they're a slightly different role to me. But as soon as we say the business, we're naturally putting ourselves on another fence and another field. And you think about it. Imagine if somebody keeps saying to you, oh, you're just the business, oh, the business. Like, you're not recognizing me as a human or a valuable member of this organization. You're putting me in this big bucket to say you're just weird and different. Yeah. And yes, you do use a different language in the business. Stakeholders use different language. But if I talk to an operational person on the front line of an organization and I talk to their chief executive, I'm going to talk different language.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's a completely different set of 3-letter acronyms. So anyway, end of rant, right? But just like, we just need to stop saying the business because we're all in the same business normally. But we have stakeholders and we have other people in other domains that speak different languages to us, and we should learn those. So coming back to, yes, learn the language all the other people in your organization speak and try to speak that language as much as you can.
Yeah. I spent a little bit of time in customer service when I first, before I became a data engineer, before I went into data, and it's that concept of adapting to your audience, right? Whatever your role is, that importance of learning how to adapt your communication style to the person that you're talking to the group that you're talking to, is such a valuable trait, and will help take you far in your career. I had a manager once tell me, again, early in my career, I was in my 20s, and I was trying to move into leadership at the time. And she told me, people see you as database boy. And I think that's the same concept that you're talking about here, just the other side of the coin, right? When you're saying, when you're differentiating the business from the data team, or you're different, the data team turns around and says the same thing back to you. So yeah, I think
but the key is, it's hard. So it's taken me probably 3 years to retrain my brain to use the word stakeholder, not the business. And that's me consciously trying not to do it. And so that language, again, if I tried to learn French right now, I'm too old, my brain's not wired, I wasn't good at it in the beginning anyway, I'm going to fail. But if you think about it as an engineer, you can take a piece of code that runs on Snowflake in a Snowflake context, and you'll be able to re-language that to run on Databricks and all the little things that are slightly different.
Yeah.
So your brain is actually really good as a data engineer to change language, to understand the differences and become that babblefish. I'm a great sci-fi fan, so Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The AI is now the babblefish that goes in our ear. Engineers are really good at that, right? We're actually really good at holding these different languages, these different concepts. This, hey, here's the data model and here's the code I need to write to be able to switch the data from that format to that format. So we're really good at it. We just need to consciously apply it outside of our code domain, I think.
I like that. We do have one more question, and then I know we're a little over, but I'm trying to communicate why future migrated data is different than current data by 15%. Best techniques to I guess, maybe communicate that back to your stakeholders. I think that's a good question, right? Because that happens, right? That variance in data as the data is cleansed, as the data kind of moves through, if you're using medallion architecture, right? As it moves through from kind of that raw data to your silver layer to your gold layer, that data can change, especially as it is validated, right? As it moves through a month. That's why finance teams have close periods at the beginning of each month and year and quarter, so that they can review and clean that data to make sure that they're reporting it accurately to shareholders. Different than stakeholders, shareholders. So yeah, do you have, what's your take on this one, Shane?
Okay, so I'd use 3 patterns for this. So let's say we're running a layered architecture, and again, let me just rant that layered architectures have been around for 30 years. I love the fact that medallion architectures have made them cool again, but the idea of having 3 or 4 layers in your data architecture is not new, but we should do it, right?
We talked about that last time. Yeah.
So the first thing I would do is I would I can't code, so I would get my engineering colleagues to create a pattern that reconciled the system of capture with our raw layer. What in our product we call it history, and I would prove that it's the same. Yeah, that the data that we got sits there that we got sent is the same data that we hold, because I want to build trust, right? I want to say we're doing our craft, we are professionals, we got this data, we've brought it in, it reconciles. There's a bunch of patterns for that. You can do, heavy table compares, which cost you a fortune in compute. You can do hashing rows, row counts. There's a whole lot of techniques you can use to reconcile that data. And that pattern is a good data ops pattern. Every time you get a new system, you should be running these reconciliation routines to prove the data that you collected is the data that you hold. That's the first thing I'd do, right? Make it safe that they trust us, that we're not losing data. The second thing I'd do is I would go and talk to the stakeholder and see what they're using that data for and whether it matters. What action and outcome are they taking, and does a 15% disparity of what they think the number should be actually matter? Now, if I'm in a drug company and it's part of a drug trial and I'm going to give this to a bunch of patients, probably care. If I'm in a marketing company and I'm going to go spam some people with the next best offer, does 15% of them being missed matter, right? So I want to understand the blast impact of this, because we're going to get to the third pattern, which is typically where the problem is. The raw data came in, we wrote a whole lot of code to do bad shit to that data to make it fit for purpose and look like the way the business, the stakeholders, see, I still do it. The stakeholders need to use it. And so we're inferring things, right? We're creating filters, we're creating measures, we're creating metrics, we're changing values, we're master dataing, we're creating a single view of customer, we're conforming keys. We're doing a whole lot of changes to that data. And we don't know if the problem is we've done that task wrong, or the data, the things we're inferring, the logic, the business logic that we're using is wrong. It doesn't meet expectations.
Yeah.
So what I would go and do is I would take one row from the history layer and I would trace it all the way through to where it gets presented to the stakeholder to make their decision. And then I would say, this is what we've done to it. Does that make sense? For that one row, because they can see the data values, right? They can see how that row has changed. How it used to be customer key 1, 2, 3, 4, but then we changed it to a hash GUID. But funny enough, in SAP 1, 2, 3, 4 was a different customer than in Salesforce, right? So now we've combined them, and in Salesforce we had 2, and in SAP we had 3, and now in our end system we don't have 5, we only have 4 because we've conformed that key, right? I'd show that one record. Now that's a trick to find it. So reconcile to make sure you're doing your job properly. Understand what the impact to the organization, your stakeholder is, if that number is different to what they expect, and then trace one record to show them. And that data by example, that pattern where you give somebody a view of a piece of data, it clicks with them because they go, oh yeah, custom ordered product, but that's actually not the right product. Yeah, they will pick up where the problem is for you a lot of the time.
And that's such a wonderful troubleshooting pattern too, that I've used a lot, in my career. I think that's, for any of us that have been in it a decent amount of time, that tracing, 1 or even like 5 records all the way through and figure out what happened along the way is something we've used before, because we've run into those things where, to your point, I had I had a situation where I had a script with 4,000 lines in it that did all of the transformations, right? That did all the transformations to integrate all the business logic. All the business logic was hard coded. So many reasons to puke about this particular script, but like there was one guy in marketing that understood why some of that business logic was implemented, 5 years prior. The programmer that wrote it, the engineer that wrote it, had long since gone. The person that inherited from him had long since gone, and then I had it. So, that's kind of the situation we were in. But that's what we did. He sat with me for a couple hours, and we went through a handful of examples of, okay, this is what it looked like when it started. This is what it looked like, and followed all the way through. This is what it looks like at the end. What's falling out here? Why are we missing things that you think that you should be seeing? And come to find out, it was just aged, stale business logic that had since changed, but because it was hard coded, nobody ever changed it in the code, and nobody knew to tell us to change it in the code, to that point. Anyway, so my point is that particular pattern is so extremely useful across the board when you're troubleshooting, I think.
Yeah. And then just to close it out, take that 4,000 lines of code and break it down to nodes and links.
Yeah.
Right. Then understand that actually the more nodes and links you have, the more complexity there is. Maybe you want to microservice it where you take it and break it down into smaller chunks because it's easier to trace. Then have a look at it and say, how much of that code's reusable, right? How much of that rule can we do as one blob of code that we can use elsewhere? How can we automate it? How can we do reconciliation on each of it? Which parts of those nodes and link steps can we reconcile because we're not actually changing the data or inferring it, we're just changing the structure? These ones are our risky ones because there's a business rule in there that actually infers stuff, right? Makes stuff up or loses stuff on purpose, right? We're filtering records out. Yeah. Like you can just see how the patterns start to apply over and over again in every task that you do.
And I think the pattern of it, the pattern that I ended up applying to that code later on when I had time and opportunity was to strip out that business logic and strip out all that hard coding out of it into more a table-driven structure that can be easily changed without having to go through a full, SDLC, full software development life cycle, right? And then even gave the business a power app so that they can add and adjust the business logic as needed.
So to give the stakeholders the power app,
so they can
adjust the business, so they can understand. Yeah, they can change the business logic whenever they feel like it.
That's right. So yeah.
Cool. And coming back to that, table-driven config, the ability of putting logic in tables that then get written by code repeatably, that is a really, really powerful pattern in data engineering, in my view. Yeah, that is actually how you, without AI, that's how you go to a 10 times developer engineer, by just adopting that one pattern. So pick that one, even if you're not going to pick anything else, because it's one of the most valuable patterns I think ever exists in the data engineering space.
And I think it's one that helps those teams that have fallen into that kind of production factory type role to take a big chunk of what's in there out and giving it back to the stakeholders to say, hey, now you could adjust this as needed. I bet it clears out 30% of some people's ticket queues easy.
And removes that drossy work of, can you just add one more case statement?
Right. I have this one little change. It'll just take you a minute. Don't worry.
Yeah, and then in my node and link map, point to me where it is. It's at the left-hand side or the right-hand side, right? That's the easy change. Oh no, it's see that metric right in the middle that everything relies on? Yeah, it's just a small change to that.
It's just that.
One line of code.
That's probably where that one person's lost that is 15%.
All the 15% was meant to be lost on purpose because the business rule is filter the data by this, and that's a natural 15%. Who knows? Again, it comes back to context, actually. That was a very simple question, but there's so many different ways both of you could actually go into this rabbit hole of what's the actual problem, right? What's the system? What's the context? Yeah, without that context, it's so hard to answer that one simple question.
And that's perfect to bring us full circle. Where do you learn the context? Asking the questions of the stakeholders to make sure that you're delivering the right thing the first time.
Yeah, understand the actions and outcomes they want to take, and whether the data work you're doing supports them to achieve that goal, because you are the data expert. You are not an order taker. You are a person that understands how data and information can drive change, and an organization can improve it. That's actually what you're good at. You just happen to write code to do it.
Shane, hey, I'm going to try to respect your time here. We've got stuff coming in, but we have already run 15 minutes over. I appreciate you so much for coming on tonight. Tell everybody where they could find you online in the interwebs.
So probably LinkedIn. So if you search for Shane Gibson or Agility or Agile Data, you'll probably find me. There's a few other more famous Shane Gibsons out in the world. I've written a book. So if you go onto Amazon and search for Agile Data Guide, you should see a big green book turn up. That's mine. And then, yeah, Perplexity or the internet, Google. Probably a little bit easier to find if you go Shane Gibson Agile Data on Google. I'm just starting to learn the patterns of SEO within the LLMs so that, the new search tools can find me yet again. A whole new set of skills for me. Yeah, depth on that one, not breadth. Yep.
And here's Shane's website right here. And again, if you go to agiledataguides.com, you could find Shane, and you'll see a lot of his information there. You could email him. His link to his book is there, and then obviously online at Shane Gibson on LinkedIn. Again, thank you, Shane, so much. Really enjoyed our conversation tonight. And to everybody else, next week we have Avia Data coming on. He's going to come on. He works with obviously aviation data, and he's going to come on and talk to us about his journey from learning how to fly, learning to be a pilot, into actual data and if I could speak at the end of this call, into actual data analysis and consulting for flight schools. So super excited about that. And then the following week, we're going to have our very own Ramona join us as well. Super excited, not our very own, but she's in one of the groups that I'm in. But Ramona's going to join us for another chat, and super excited to have her on as well. And if you missed last week's, had a great talk about nonprofits and data in the nonprofit world with Lindsay, who is the data coach. So thank you, Shane, so much for coming on. Really always enjoy our conversations. And to everybody else, you all have a great night, and we'll see you again next week.